Now listen. You may have heard these words before, but I'll teach you what they really mean. Go beyond! Plus!
Hey, what is up my fellow Beyonders? Plus Ultra James here, coming at you with another video from Go Beyond Comics. So my friends, Shattered Glass issue 3 just dropped, and I'm not going to do a recap this time. So for those of you who need to get caught up, links are in the description box down below, or you'll see it right here. But before we dive into the issue, I would like to first give a shout out and a thank you to Rosilla for being an awesome subscriber. This individual gives me thorough answers, has been very positive and kind. Same with Blue Raccoon 10. If I make a mistake, these guys correct and teach me. I very much appreciate you guys. My last shout out is to Rudy Cervantes, who revealed something to me that I wasn't aware of. The cover of the first issue of Transformers Shattered Glass is actually a copy to Marvel's Transformers Generation 2 War Without End issue 1 cover, where instead of a damaged face of Blurr, you have a damaged face of Optimus Prime. And this cover looks just as good as the Blurr cover to me, despite the time difference. So again, I would like to thank you guys for everything. But now with all of that out of the way, let's get right into it. So the issue opens up with Starscream and Megatron walking through Gold City, the Autobot stronghold under Goldbug's control. Starscream feels uneasy, vulnerable, casually walking through the city. Megatron tells him that he's not being paranoid. Their disguises do nothing but stall the inevitable. But if Autobots find out and hunt them, then surviving Decepticons will find them as well. And the more that join the fight, the better they are suited to protect the power he carries. They meet with Ravager, who says to Megatron and Starscream that he thought both of them were dead, that Soundwave has been keeping tabs on other Decepticons, spending all his time making sure that any he can find are okay, and assures them that they're not alone. They finally meet with Soundwave, who welcomes them to Decepticon radio. Starscream points out in his narration that they could go out and find surviving Decepticons, but they can't because of the price on his head. Fortunately though, they have Soundwave. What we also learn in Starscream's narration is that during the war, Soundwave was actually the morale officer who tried his best to prevent the trauma of war. That's one of the big reasons he's created such a network, to keep the other Decepticons going despite the losses they've endured. Starscream wants to use this network to reach out to those surviving Decepticons to fight. What Soundwave says next though really shows us how noble he really is. He tells Starscream that he wants to tear down the Autobot warlords and tyrants as much as he does, but he's not willing to do it at the expense of those Decepticons who've experienced so much trauma. He won't ask them to fight. When Starscream replies that he wouldn't ask him to do that, Soundwave says good, then he won't regret reaching out to Starscream's fellow Seekers. We find out that there are more Decepticons than the Autobots would have people think, that there's a lot out there that still believe in Starscream and Megatron. Starscream worries about Soundwave here, asking, when was the last time he wasn't on the radio? And Soundwave replies many cycles, that he couldn't risk not being there when someone needed him. I really like this Soundwave. Like, he's just comes across as so noble, and he really cares about the Decepticons and the cause. We then go to a flashback of when Megatron grabbed Prowl, seeing it from Starscream and Jetfire's point of view. As they're discussing the situation, we learn they both perceive it differently. Starscream sees it as Autobots treating minors as less than, and having no respect for their positions as Cybertronian, and masquerade as civilized but really act like barbarians. Whereas Jetfire sees it as a minor breaking the law and doesn't really care about the minors at all, how they're treated. He only cares about them getting funding for their research to excavate a Titan in order to understand Cybertron more and their history. The next bot they meet looking for funding is Orion Pax, telling him they believe the Titan Metroplex is just lacking the ability to move, that his donation would go a long way in testing this hypothesis. Orion then tosses their datapad, telling them that they've been studying the culture as it pertains to the Titans, searching for funding all over Cybertron just to unbury Metroplex's head so they can speak to him. He basically tells them that that was their mistake, looking for just academic funding and not military funding, seeking to not only communicate but use the power of the Titan, that he can give them both funding as much as they want if they can get results. But what he says next is definitely Orion here playing the Game of Thrones. He says whatever they discover has to be kept under wraps, masking it as not every bot would understand. That's where Starscream asks, despite Jetfire telling him to shut up, who would they be reporting to? And Orion just simply says, does it matter? Starscream walks off saying this conversation is over. Through his narration, Starscream says that he heard rumors of shadowy figures encroaching on the government, disguised as soldiers and senators planning on stealing freedoms. But he hadn't believed it until that conversation. Later, we go to Megatron and Starscream discussing the need to recruit more to the cause after they gather the first wave through Decepticon radio. Starscream mentions about making a statement once they figure out how to use the code within him. Megatron then asks Starscream, is he looking forward to spouting the same rhetoric again? And what Starscream replies really makes a lot of sense, saying, look at what has become of Cybertron. The planet that had once held great cities of philosophy and knowledge has become back alleys ruled by warlords and tyrants. There are many bots out there with no way to fuel and focus their frustration. He believes that if the masses hear from both of them, they might be able to turn more Cybertronians to their cause. Not just Decepticons, but maybe Autobots as well. Starscream then notices more suspicious glances and starts to get nervous that they'll get caught, but Megatron points out something very true here, basically saying to Starscream, has it ever occurred to you while you were busy looking toward the future that you forgot the war we're fighting right in front of you? Megatron then smashes their table and an Autobot spy that was attached to the table reveals itself. Starscream admits in his narration that it's always been his problem. He looks forward to the future so much he never sees what's happening right in front of him. We then go to a flashback with an excited Starscream saying to Jetfire, I told you we'd do it. They're at their research site having successfully got funding for their excavation and study of the Titan Metroplex's head. And this thing is just gigantic. Like, it looks so awesome. I can't even imagine what it looks like in its full glory. We see that Starscream is happy to finally be able to study the history and knowledge that could be locked away in Metroplex's head. However, Jetfire has been coming across as grumpy. Starscream notes this and he understands it because of how much they had to fight to get anyone to listen to them and forget their past and move on, chasing an impossible dream that soon brutes like Orion Pax will see why everyone should have access to their history. Jetfire mentions, though, that he hasn't been able to translate Metroplex's thought speech for what feels like kilocycles. That what if they run out of funding? This is where we see the divide between Starscream and Jetfire. Starscream thinks that the more evidence they have, the more funding they'll get, whereas Jetfire believes they should have just went with Orion's deal. Then they would have unlimited funding and not have to worry about it. That Orion just wants to control access to it. Starscream replies he just wants to destroy it, that those who want to control access, history, and culture are nothing but tyrants. Jetfire then promises to never bring it up again. Meanwhile, after Megatron revealed the spy, Starscream and him are faced with Blaster and a group of Autobots at his side. He says, looks like Megatron and Seeker is on the menu tonight. He says whoever brings them down gets double the contract price. Then the battle begins. Megatron grabs this bot who lunged at him in mid-air, gripping him by his head. He then tosses him towards Starscream, who slices the bot in half. Megatron blasts another bot with his arm cannon. Blaster then strikes Starscream from behind. Megatron grabs Blaster from behind, saying to Starscream, all is lost if you're captured. Starscream escapes, angry at himself, knowing that if he was loyal to Megatron, he would be there, but that would mean he would be disloyal to the mission. He regrets leaving Megatron, feeling like he can't do this on his own. We then go to another flashback with Jetfire meeting with Orion about what they've achieved so far in their research, saying their current theory is that a drive can communicate with the Titan. When Jetfire mentions Starscream, one of the bots here says, you mean your Decepticon partner? And Jetfire defends him, saying he's not one. Starscream is then discovered eavesdropping on their meeting. Prowl says he's not an Autobot, he's a Decepticon. However, Jetfire continues to defend him, saying he's not a Decepticon, that he's the most loyal bot he's ever met. That's why Starscream won't cross that line. He then yells at Starscream to tell them that he's not a Decepticon. Starscream replies, I'm not a Decepticon. The Decepticons are fighters, fighting against the Autobots who are taking our work and destroying what they can't control. You talk about trust when you're okay with that. I trusted in who we are and who we should be. So I may not be a Decepticon, but I'm not an Autobot either. Jetfire, you betrayed us all. Jetfire then hits Starscream in the face, and then in Starscream's narration, he says he didn't even feel the punch. He was already melted to the core. For a moment, he thought Jetfire might still be the bot he knew, where he wasn't alone in a room full of monsters. The Autobots grab Starscream, but he was able to escape. He then heads to the excavation site and starts to destroy all the work and research there, in order to make sure the Autobots don't get their hands on it. But as he's destroying it, he stops himself, realizing he still believes in Cybertron and his life's work. The Titans had to be a solution to their problem. He decides to bind all the data they had to his spark, but the data transfer was interrupted. He ran out of time. Jetfire had arrived with the other Autobots. Because of this interruption, the data had been corrupted on both ends, turned into nothing but mangled coding. Starscream was able to escape without being captured, but felt miserable from everything that had transpired. We then go to a few cycles ago from current day. Starscream returned to Metroplex after the war. He heard the Autobots try to use other sparks to speak to the Titan, but they weren't strong enough. He knew his spark was the only one strong enough to run the program, even though it felt broken. His isolation after the war gave him the time to re-examine the code. After many cycles, he finally figured it out. He bridged the gap between himself and what he left buried at Metroplex. Starscream ran the program, bound his spark to what remained of Cybertron's path. Every part of him screamed in agony, but also sang in harmony with the words of the Titan running through him. We go back to current day. Starscream is attacked from behind, knocked out. Initially, he hoped it was his fellow Seekers, but he knew it wasn't the case. He knew it was something worse. He awakes to find Goldbug and Jetfire standing over him. And that is the end of issue 3, my fellow Beyonders. This issue was a really nice spotlight on Starscream. We got more of his history before and after the war, his relationship with Jetfire, and overall just who he is. And it was really quite refreshing and so different from all the iterations I saw growing up as a kid and all the different Transformers shows. I enjoyed this issue a lot. It might be my favorite issue so far, honestly. Well, if you guys enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. I would greatly appreciate it. Comment down below your thoughts on this issue. I know there's a lot to unpack here, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Other than that, peace, love, and blessings to you and your families, and always remember every day to go beyond plus ultra. See you, my friends.